The first sign of the apocalypse isn't a mushroom cloud. It's a strongly worded letter from the HOA, delivered on pristine, ivory-colored cardstock, smelling faintly of passive aggression and regret. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. Honestly, in the blurry, beige landscape of American suburbia, days cease to matter, swallowed by the ritualistic chaos of the morning commute and the faint, persistent scent of neighborly judgment. I, Leo Maxwell, 42, aspiring author and full-time hostage negotiator for two small, sticky human beings, was nursing my third cup of coffee. The chaos was standard. 10-year-old Finn was attempting to wear his backpack as a cape, and 8-year-old Toby was arguing that Cheerios should legally qualify as a vegetable. My world was small. My sanity was hanging by a thread. And then the mail arrived. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't junk mail. It was thick, stiff, and bore the official crest-like logo of the Westwood Lakes Homeowners Association. I hate those guys. They're like a miniature hyper-local dictatorship, policing everything from the height of your grass to the specific shade of taupe on your exterior walls. I opened it with the same dread one feels when peeling off a Band-Aid, knowing a small, painful chunk of life is about to be lost. The letter, entitled Notice of Violation and Formal Grievance, Excessive Noise and Unpermitted Commercial Activity, was addressed to me. I skimmed past the legal jargon, past the reference to Section 4.b, Subclause 2, the preservation of tranquility, and landed on the juicy, specific details. The complaint was filed by a concerned resident and detailed a 4-hour period last Saturday. 4 hours. 4 hours of alleged noise. I leaned against the granite countertop, momentarily forgetting the sugar spill Toby had just created, and laughed. A dry, strangled sound that Finn immediately called the old man cough. The source of this grievous suburban crime? The most innocent, Shinkisun, G-rated and fundamentally American act possible. A lemonade stand. "What is it, Dad? Are we in trouble?" Finn asked, adjusting his backpack cape. "Nobody," I said, refolding the letter. "We're not in trouble. We've just been formally declared a threat to the established order of things." "Oh, they want order?" I thought, taking a slow, defiant sip of coffee. They're about to get chaos, impeccably orchestrated and delivered. Let's be clear about what actually happened last Saturday. It was 75 degrees and sunny. The boys, inspired by a very questionable young entrepreneur video on YouTube, decided to revitalize the classic American dream on our sidewalk. Their stand wasn't a rickety piece of plywood. No, Finn, being the slightly more detail-oriented one, had repurposed my old IKEA shelving unit, draping it with a genuinely charming red and white checkered tablecloth. Toby, the marketing guru, had taped up a massive handwritten sign that read, "Lemonade, $1, no lice." It was a little specific, but effective. The alleged noise? It was twofold, according to Brenda's meticulously documented complaint. Excessive commercial noise, vocal proclamations. This was Toby, who has the volume control of a jet engine, intermittently yelling, "Fresh squeezed! Get your fresh squeezed!" Unpermitted foot traffic, congregating patrons. This was 3 neighborhood families, 4 cyclists, and a surprisingly enthusiastic FedEx driver stopping by. We had a great run. We made $12.35. The letter went on to detail the alleged infractions with truly baffling precision. The sustained frequency of the juveniles' vocalizations measured an estimated 82 decibels at the property line. See attached time-stamped video stills. 82 decibels. That's roughly the sound level of a blender, or heavy city traffic, or, life. I looked at the video stills attached. Blurry, grainy images taken from a high angle, clearly from the second-story window of the house, directly across the street. The house belonging to Brenda Miller, the concerned resident. The woman who organizes her spices by font size, who treats the community newsletter like the New York Times, and who had clearly spent her Saturday afternoon armed with a decibel meter and a righteous sense of suburban justice. She's the person who calls the electric company when her porch light bulb dies. She is, in short, the Karen. Brenda lives in a state of perpetually offended beige. Her house is the exact same model as mine, but somehow hers manages to look judgy. You just know the inside of her garage is clean enough to perform open-heart surgery. I've had minor skirmishes with Brenda for years. The first was when I painted my mailbox a slightly brighter shade of bronze than the HOA-approved antique copper. She reported it. The second was when I accidentally put my recycling bin out on Tuesday night instead of Wednesday morning. She left a note. A handwritten, italicized note that said, "Timeliness is the cornerstone of community integrity." I once saw her shoo a squirrel off her lawn with a laser pointer. That's the level of engagement we are dealing with here. I flashed back to the day of the lemonade stand. I was sitting on the porch swing, supervising, when she walked past, walking her aggressively small Shih Tzu, Princess Fluffy Butt. "Morning, Brenda," I chirped, feeling genuinely cheerful. She stopped. She didn't look at me. She looked at the sign. Lemonade, $1, no lice. Her face tightened into that familiar expression, the one that suggests she's just smelled spoiled milk, but isn't quite sure who produced it. "Leo," she said, her voice dry and brittle, like dead leaves crunching underfoot. "I find this display rather disruptive. It's a lemonade stand, Brenda. We're raising money for new Legos." "It's the constant shouting, Leo. It degrades the residential character of the street, and, quite frankly, the no lice sign is terribly gauche. It suggests a certain lack of hygiene in the neighborhood. I have a call with the HOA about the fall planting schedule, and I don't need this kind of ambiguity." "Ambiguity about lice?" I deadpanned. "Ambiguity about standards," she corrected, giving me a look that could curdle cream. She yanked Princess Fluffybutt's leash and marched off, already composing the letter in her head. And now, here it was, in my hands, a masterpiece of bureaucratic grievance. The really annoying part wasn't the HOA letter, it was the uniformed authority that showed up a few hours later, just as I was making lunch. Knock, knock. I opened the door to find a man in a slightly too tight navy blue uniform, looking profoundly bored. He had the tired eyes of someone who's seen the absolute worst of humanity, and also the absolute worst of suburban zoning disputes. "Mr. Maxwell?" "That's me. Are the Cheerios officially a vegetable now?" He offered a weak, professional smile. "I'm Officer Miller. I'm here regarding a report of unpermitted soliciting and excessive noise, specifically in relation to a temporary commercial venture listed here as a lemonade stand." I gestured to the empty porch. "Well, officer, as you can see, the venture is currently on hiatus. The principal investors have retired to the kitchen to build a fort out of pillows." He pulled out a notepad. "Look, Mr. Maxwell, between you and me, this is what we call a nuisance call. But the department received 2 calls. One citing the noise, one citing the lack of a city permit for soliciting goods." "A permit? For $12.35? The law is comprehensive, sir. The official complaint is filed under Section 38, Temporary Roadside Vending. I have to issue a verbal warning and advise you to cease all unpermitted commercial activities. Officer Miller, I started, leaning against the doorframe. I appreciate you having to babysit this slice of suburban absurdity, but if I promise that the boys will only sell lemonade inside the house, does that satisfy the roadside vending clause? He sighed, running a hand over his crew cut. If they sold it inside the house, that would be a private sale, not roadside vending. And the noise complaint, which was about 82 decibels at the property line, would be nullified by the structure itself, provided the structure is sound. Sound, I repeated, letting the word sink in. So, if the structure were, say, extremely sound, I could potentially host a small air traffic control center in my living room, provided the decibel level at the property line was compliant? Officer Miller closed his notepad. That would be a very expensive experiment, sir. But yes, the law is concerned with the impact at the property line. He looked past me at Brenda's house, then back at me, a flicker of genuine sympathy in his eyes. Tell the boys they had a good run, and maybe find them a hobby that doesn't involve shouting. He gave me a curt nod and left. He hadn't just given me a warning, he'd given me the loophole. The law cares about the impact at the property line. It wasn't about the activity, it was about the decibel level. I watched Officer Miller drive away, his cruiser a symbol of the weary bureaucracy Brenda had so expertly deployed. My kids, sensing my tension, had emerged from their pillow fort. "Is the lemonade stand dead, Dad?" Toby asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. "No, buddy," I said, kneeling down. "The lemonade stand is merely taking a temporary, strategic retreat. Your mother and I will teach you that sometimes, when faced with an obstacle, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with something much louder." I sat at my computer, the HOA letter spread out next to me, documenting the precise, pathetic nature of Brenda's complaint. She wanted quiet? I would give her an absolute symphony of contained noise. She wanted rules. I would weaponize the building code. I spent the next hour researching soundproofing techniques, local zoning laws for accessory structures, and then the glorious centerpiece of my retaliation, musical instruments. A tuba? Too subtle. A set of bagpipes? Too cliché. A full-on, glorious, beautiful, deafening acoustic drum kit. I found a 5-piece Ludwig kit on a music site, chrome sparkling, cymbals gleaming. It was professional grade, ridiculously loud, and utterly perfect. This wasn't about noise pollution. This was about educational enrichment and artistic expression. Good luck citing the preservation of tranquility against the pursuit of musical excellence. I hit Add to Cart like it was the nuclear launch button for the HOA. I added the necessary accessories, sticks, cymbals, the throne, and a terrifyingly large order of acoustic foam and specialized drywall. The total was obscene, but the look on Brenda's face when she saw the crates arrive, priceless. "This, Brenda," I muttered to the empty air, holding up her precious letter, "is going to be my masterpiece." 3 days later, the drums arrived. They didn't arrive quietly. They arrived in a freight truck the size of a small whale, necessitating the temporary blocking of the road and causing, I kid you not, a 4-car backup. The driver, a jovial man named Jorge, had to use a pallet jack to wrestle the sheer volume of boxes onto my driveway. The kids were in awe. Finn was analyzing the structural integrity of the shipping boxes, and Toby was jumping on the large crate labeled "Drums, handle with extreme care," as if it were a trampoline. And then there was Brenda. I saw the flick of her blinds as the freight truck pulled up. I saw her emerge 15 minutes later, ostensibly to retrieve her mail, but really to conduct a visual inventory of my newly arrived arsenal. The driveway was currently a chaotic tableau of suburban rebellion. 2 huge boxes labeled Ludwig, a dozen sheets of specialized soundproofing drywall, and 300 pounds of compressed, dense insulation. As Jorge wrestled the final massive cymbal box off the pallet jack, I met Brenda's stare. She was wearing that look of profound, silent suffering, as if watching this delivery was a personal attack on her delicate emotional equilibrium. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I offered a short, triumphant, and utterly devastating wave, accompanied by the biggest, fakest smile I could manufacture. It was the smile of a man who just spent his college fund on a glorified noise machine just to annoy his neighbor. Brenda's face went slightly pale, and she retreated rapidly into her fortress of beige righteousness. "Dad, what is all this?" Finn asked, kicking a box. "This, gentleman," I announced, pulling off the cover of the main drum box, "is the beginning of your educational enrichment. This is the genesis of the Cease and Desist Slayers." The drums were beautiful, but the garage was a garage. A messy, oily, concrete cave full of garden tools, forgotten Christmas decorations, and the faint, lingering smell of last summer's fertilizer fiasco. If I simply set the kit up in there, and the boys hit the snare drum once, Brenda's complaint of 82 decibels would look like an apology note. The actual sound would be classified as a weapon of mass auditory destruction. The entire point of this expensive, ridiculous venture was to win the legal loophole war. Officer Miller said the law only cares about the impact at the property line. If Brenda can't hear it, she can't report it. And if she can't report it, the whole affair becomes my private, soundproofed victory garden. But wait. This required work. Real, actual, manual labor that involved more than just assembling IKEA furniture. This meant dealing with the contractors. I felt a wave of existential dread. I didn't just need a space for noise. I needed a noise bunker. I needed an acoustic fortress. I needed professionals. I spent the evening on Yelp, searching for soundproofing experts. The project brief crystallized in my mind. Convert 20x20 garage into a structurally compliant, acoustically isolated, climate-controlled educational music studio for 2 enthusiastic, noise-loving children. I had to protect my sanity, maintain plausible deniability, and, most importantly, protect Brenda's windows from shattering when Toby discovered the joys of the crash cymbal. The next morning, the interviews began. Gary was the first to arrive. He drove a pristine hybrid pickup truck and wore linen pants. His business card read, "Gary, Harmonic Home Solutions, where energy meets architecture." I immediately knew we were incompatible. He walked into my messy, smelly garage and took a deep, theatrical breath. "Ah, the energy in here is chaotic, Leo, but fixable." "Great. I need to make it soundproof. Like, I need to be able to set off a small firecracker in here and have my neighbor not hear it," I explained. Gary closed his eyes, tilting his head. "We don't soundproof, Leo. We strive for acoustic harmony. We would use reclaimed, natural wood, maybe a living moss wall for diffusion, and install a skylight to invite the natural light to dance." "Gary, I'm putting a drum kit in here, not a yoga retreat. I need density, mass, and enough dead airspace to make Bonham sound like a gentle whisper." "But why fight the sound, Leo? Why not integrate it? Perhaps we could consult on turning this into a multi-purpose, harmonious, natural light meditation space where the drumming is the percussion of the soul." He quoted me a price that suggested he was using actual gold leaf as the sound barrier. "Gary, with respect," I said, leaning in, The sole percussion you're talking about is going to be two 8-year-olds whacking things with reckless abandon, fueled by Sunny D and spite. I need military grade, not meditation grade. I think we have fundamentally different philosophical approaches to noise. I see, Gary said, looking deeply disappointed, as if I had failed a spiritual exam. Then perhaps my services are too vibrational for your specific project goals. He left, taking the organic, good energy vibes of his linen pants with him. My second interview was with Rick. Rick was the complete opposite of Gary. Rick arrived in a battered minivan, smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and ambition, and quoted me a price that seemed suspiciously low. His business card was just his name and a phone number scrawled on the back of a pizza flyer. Soundproofing, you say? Piece of cake, pal. I did my cousin's basement for his death metal band. They could barely hear the police sirens when they showed up, Rick boasted, pulling a rusty tape measure from his belt. Excellent. What's your plan? Specialized drywall? Resilient channels? Nah, we're gonna use science, Rick said, tapping the concrete wall. It's all about acoustic resonance. Acoustic resonance, he continued, holding up a finger. Imagine a tuna can. Now, imagine you fill that can with marbles. When you shake it, it makes noise, right? Right, I replied, confused. But if you fill it with mud? No noise. See? Density. We're gonna fill the walls with regular drywall. Then we put a second layer up. But here's the trick. We stuff old sweaters, packing peanuts, maybe some discarded newspapers in between. That's the mud. Rick beamed, genuinely proud of his methodology. Rick, I'm pretty sure that's how you invite every rodent in Westwood Lakes to hold a convention in my wall cavity. And fire code? Fire code is for the weak, Leo. This is about density. He then tried to demonstrate his understanding of sound by hitting a wrench against the side of the garage, producing a sharp, metallic clang. Just then, Toby peeked around the corner. Hey, Mr. Rick, can you build a secret snack compartment into the wall? Secret snack compartment? Rick's eyes lit up. Kid, I can build you a secret snack kitchen. I got a guy who can reroute the plumbing. I quickly intervened. No secret snack kitchen, Toby. No rerouted plumbing, Rick. We are sticking to soundproofing. Rick, your quote is appealing, but your use of discarded newspapers and the structural integrity of this project gives me anxiety. The project involves compliance, not just density. Rick shrugged, putting away his rusty tools. Fine. Your loss. I'm telling you, the sweaters work. I watched him drive off, realizing that finding a contractor who was both competent and willing to take on a suburban passive aggression project was going to be my biggest hurdle. I had to find someone professional enough to get the permits, but gruff enough not to judge the sheer ridiculousness of the assignment. My last hope was Maria. Her Yelp reviews were split. Half of them were 4 stars praising her efficiency and high quality, and the other half were 1-star complaints about her abrasive bedside manner and unwillingness to compromise on scheduling. Perfect. Maria arrived in a clean but heavily used work van, wearing steel-toed boots and a healthy expression of disdain for the world. I immediately liked her. Leo Maxwell? You're the drum room guy? She asked, not shaking my hand, but instead pointing at the IKEA shelf-turned lemonade stand leaning against the wall. Guilty. It started small. It escalated quickly. I read your request. Extreme acoustic isolation needed due to localized noise complaints from neighboring party. Let me translate that, she said, pulling out a proper laser measuring device. You want to build a bunker so your neighbor can't complain about the noise you deliberately plan to make. That is a concise and brutally accurate summary, Maria. She spent 5 minutes measuring the space, checking the foundation, and looking up at the rafters. She didn't offer any suggestions about moss walls or snack kitchens. She just nodded. "Here's the deal," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "I use specialized double-layer drywall, resilient channels, mass-loaded vinyl, and acoustic putty. I pull all the permits. We do this right. It will cost exactly this much." She wrote a number on a clipboard. "And it will take exactly 3 weeks. You hire me for the engineering, not the creative vision. Understood?" "Understood. Will it withstand the auditory assault of 2 kids playing the drums?" "It will withstand the sound waves of their actual trained instructor. And yes, I saw the name of your neighbor on the city permitting database, the one with the 10 noise complaints last year about leaf blowers. I get it. I'm building you a fortress against petty suburban warfare. Pay me in checks or cash, doesn't matter. We start Monday." "You are a visionary, Maria." "I am a contractor," she corrected, giving me the closest thing to a smile a person like Maria was capable of. "And I hate Karens." I had found my co-conspirator. The project was a go. Monday morning was not subtle. Maria arrived at 7:00 a.m. sharp, with a crew of 3 men, a giant dumpster, and a collection of power tools that sounded like they were actively auditioning for a heavy metal band. The irony, the noise Brenda complained about, the 82 decibels of 2 children selling citrus, was nothing compared to the absolute glorious racket of legitimate permitted construction. For 3 weeks, Westwood Lakes was subjected to the auditory equivalent of a dental cleaning performed with a jackhammer. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust, the metallic tang of cut studs, and the constant high-pitched whine of saws. I meticulously logged the sounds, purely for my own amusement. 7:15 a.m. The aggressive, sustained whir of the reciprocating saw, quickly followed by the crash of old drywall hitting the dumpster. 10:30 a.m. Maria, yelling at the roof because one of her guys measured wrong. Crash. 1:00 p.m. The maddening, repetitive thwack, thwack, thwack of the nail gun, which sounded precisely like a giant woodpecker attacking the foundation of Brenda's sanity. 3:45 p.m. Rick, who Maria had inexplicably hired as a gopher because he was cheap and didn't complain, humming loudly while carrying lumber. Brenda, of course, was documenting everything. Every day, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., I would catch a glimpse of her. Sometimes it was just the flash of her phone camera taking wide shots of the dumpster. Other times, she was meticulously measuring the distance of the construction vehicles from the curb. She looked like a field operative in a poorly funded spy novel. "She's logging the infractions," Maria noted one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. "Let her. This is all legal noise. We filed for an accessory structure modification permit. The city gives you a wide berth for noise during the designated hours." The irony was beautiful. Brenda had won the battle against the lemonade stand by exploiting a loophole. Now, I was winning the war by exploiting an even bigger, noisier loophole called the American right to build a soundproof bunker to prevent annoying your neighbor who you hate. The garage was taking shape. Maria and her team had layered 3 types of sheetrock, built a second, floating wall structure, separated by resilient channels, and installed a heavy industrial-grade steel door. It was ugly, functional, and beautiful. Before it was entirely finished, I brought in the drum teacher, Dusty. Dusty was exactly what I had hoped for. He was in his late 50s, wore a faded, vintage Black Sabbath t-shirt, and had the kind of permanent hearing damage that made him speak at a constant roar. He was a professional drummer who taught lessons on the side. "Leo, this place is a cathedral of acoustics!" Dusty yelled, examining the exposed frame. "It's not finished," I yelled back. What? Can't hear you. I pointed to the garage. It's for the boys, Finn and Toby. They're beginners. Beginners? Will, fix that. We'll get them on the path to glory. We set up the kit, a shimmering, intimidating beast of chrome and lacquered wood, right in the center of the concrete floor. The kids were ecstatic. The first lesson was pure, beautiful chaos. All right, boys. First thing, we need rhythm. Repeat after me. Bum-chka-bum, Dusty bellowed. Finn, the meticulous one, tried. Bum-chka-bum, like that, Dusty? Toby, the one with the impulse control of a sugar-addled squirrel, simply launched himself at the cymbals, hitting them with both sticks and producing a sharp, deafening tsie clang. That's the spirit, Toby! Maximum destruction! Dusty roared, seemingly undeterred. But we gotta follow the beat. We need a 4-4. Can you count to 4? 1, 2, crash! 35, Toby yelled, hitting the floor tom with a vengeance. This, I thought, standing slightly back and watching the beautiful mess, is going to cost me a fortune in Advil. But the pure, unadulterated joy on Toby's face when he hits that cymbal? That's my $10,000 revenge fund. Well spent. I realized the project had inadvertently succeeded in giving my kids a passion, even if the primary motivation was spite. Maria was in her final week of construction, installing the actual acoustic tiles, when the second HOA letter arrived. This one wasn't a notice of violation. It was an emergency meeting notice regarding pervasive community disruption. It was worse than the last one. It was 30 pages long, spiral-bound, and featured a table of contents. Brenda had leveraged her construction documentation into a formal legal assault. Key complaints: auditory assault, the morning racket. Citing the sustained power tool noise as deliberate emotional harassment. Aesthetic degradation, the dumpster. Claiming the presence of a large industrial waste receptacle for 19 days severely impacted property values and sight lines. Structural ambiguity, the secret project. Accusing me of building an unauthorized, purpose-built structure of unknown intent, possibly a bunker or a clandestine distillery. She was demanding that the HOA board vote to issue a stop work order and require me to tear down the entire modification. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. 30 pages. This woman is a menace. She is the Lex Luthor of beige suburban conformity. But she just made one mistake. She focused on the construction, the temporary noise and inconvenience, not the final soundproofed product. And Maria got all the right permits. I emailed the HOA board, politely confirming my attendance, and attached a single document, the City of Westwood Lakes accessory structure. Modification permit, number 2025-44B, stamped and approved by the building inspector, signed by Maria. I added a note. I look forward to discussing my children's federally protected right to educational enrichment. The battle was escalating from a street fight to a political drama. It was Friday evening. The garage was complete. It was painted a nondescript utility gray, carpeted with thick industrial Berber, and the walls were lined with diamond-pattern acoustic foam panels. It looked less like a garage, and more like the inside of a spaceship designed by a sound engineer. Maria stood in the center, arms crossed. Okay, Leo, I built you a fortress. Let's see if it holds up to two kids who have no idea what they're doing. No, Maria. Tonight, we test the maximum stress load. Tonight, we bring in the master. I handed Dusty a pair of sticks. Sound check, Dusty yelled, walking into the room. The plan was simple. Dusty would play his loudest, most complex solo for 5 minutes. I would stand outside, right at the property line, with my phone's decibel meter. I walked out, closing the heavy insulated door behind me. The noise immediately dropped from a roar to a low subsonic rumble. I walked across the lawn, past the mailbox, and stood exactly at the border of Brenda's property. Maria gave a thumbs up from the window. Dusty hit the snare. Crack, boom, tesh, bum, ka, tesh, boom. The garage was filled with the sound of pure, unadulterated rock fury. I looked at my decibel meter. 48 dB. That's the level of quiet conversation. Background radio, a humming refrigerator. I could faintly hear the vibration, the low bass notes traveling through the foundation, but the high-frequency sounds, the cymbals, the snare crack, the very soul of the noise, were completely trapped. I turned and looked at Brenda's house. Her lights were on. She was definitely home. But she was being assaulted by silence, a triumphant, glorious, over-engineered silence. I was basking in the glow of victory, the drum kit silent for the night, the soundproofing complete, when the flashing lights showed up. It was Officer Miller again. He pulled up slowly, his tires crunching on my driveway gravel, casting an ominous blue and red light show across my pristine gray garage. "Mr. Maxwell," he said, walking up, notepad already in hand. He looked less amused this time, more genuinely weary. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to see you again so soon." "Officer Miller, to what do I owe this distinct pleasure? I haven't sold any lemonade today, unless a single poorly executed air drum solo counts as a public nuisance." The conversation was now pivoting from funny to serious. "The call came in at 7:15 p.m., Miller said, consulting his notes. "Reported as unbearable noise pollution and violation of curfew, specifically in relation to the garage structure. The caller cited the period between 7 o'clock and 7:15 p.m. "That was the 5-minute test run, officer. My kids weren't even playing." "I understand, sir, but the caller stated the soundproofing was clearly inadequate, and that the noise levels were detrimental to the peaceful enjoyment of her home." Miller hesitated, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping. "Look, Leo, I'm required to file this report. I have to put down that I investigated and found no evidence of noise violation at the property line." "So where's the problem?" "The problem is the city. Your neighbor is escalating. She's not just calling the cops anymore. She's been down to the city planning department. She's filed a formal complaint citing unauthorized structural modification and building code violations concerning your garage conversion. The HOA letter, Leo, is just the warm-up." I felt a cold prickle of reality. This wasn't just passive aggression anymore. It was high-level municipal bureaucracy. "But Maria pulled the permits. I have them right here." I reached for my clipboard. "I believe you do," Miller said softly. "But she's claiming that the purpose of the structure violates the intent of the single-family dwelling zoning. She's twisting it. She's claiming you've built a commercial recording studio." He looked past me at the solid, unyielding gray door. He shook his head. "She's not just calling the cops, Leo. She's building a case. The building inspector is scheduled to visit next week." I watched the cruiser pull away, the red and blue flashing lights seeming less like a distant problem and more like a direct warning signal. Brenda hadn't won yet, but she had successfully raised the stakes to critical level. My genius act of suburban spite might actually bankrupt me. The stakes were terrifyingly high. A visit from the building inspector meant that if Brenda had found a legitimate loophole, Maria's glorious sound bunker could be condemned, and I'd be forced to rip it all out. And then I'd be left with a $10,000 drum kit and a passive-aggressive neighbor who had won. Unacceptable. I immediately called my friend, Mandy. Mandy is a corporate attorney, the kind of person who uses legal jargon as a second language. We met at a coffee shop, and I spread out Brenda's 30-page manifesto and my stack of Maria's permits. Brenda's primary argument, Mandy said, sipping her oat milk latte, is that you converted the garage into an unauthorized commercial structure, aka a professional recording studio, which violates Zoning Ordinance 3.4.1, Residential Use Mandate. But it's not commercial. It's for my kids. It's educational enrichment. Mandy tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the HOA rules. But the HOA rules, which are referenced by the zoning ordinance, are vague. Here, look at Article 7, Subclause D, Accessory Structures. She pointed to a line. Accessory structures may not serve as primary dwelling or commercial function. Exceptions may be made for uses serving educational enrichment, provided that the use is non-profit and supplementary to the residential function. Bingo, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Non-profit, supplementary. Exactly, Mandy confirmed. So, when the building inspector shows up, he needs to see one thing and one thing only: educational enrichment. You need a sign that says, "The Cease and Desist Slayers Advanced Music Theory and Percussion Dojo." You need a syllabus. You need sheet music. You need Dusty. And if Brenda brings up the noise? Mandy shrugged. The inspector cares about structure, not sound. The structure is permitted. The noise is a matter for the cops, and Officer Miller already ruled in your favor. You've got the permits, you've got the loophole. You're fine, Leo. You're just monumentally petty, which, legally, is a protected right. I left the coffee shop feeling triumphant. Brenda had built her case on structural ambiguity, and I was going to crush it with a curriculum. The weirdest thing about my calculated act of spite? My kids were actually getting good. Dusty, despite his volume, was a phenomenal teacher. He had them starting with rudiments, proper stick handling, and counting. Finn had a natural, steady rhythm and a surprising ear for the hi-hat. Toby, while still a chaos demon on the crash cymbal, was learning the powerful satisfaction of a perfectly executed floor tom hit. They now had a schedule: 2 hours every weekday evening, 45 minutes on Saturday. They had transformed from bored kids selling warm lemonade into the enthusiastic and loud members of the Cease and Desist Slayers. I didn't mean to do this. I meant to simply build a sound prison and occasionally let my children hit things loudly to annoy my enemy. But they found joy. They found discipline. I was attempting a cold war of passive aggression, and I accidentally funded a music education program. Accidental good parenting is definitely a thing now. I should probably get a tax credit for the cost of the mass-loaded vinyl. I found myself pausing my own work just to listen to the muffled thump, thump, thump from the garage. It was a beautiful, contained, persistent beat. It was the sound of my family, protected from the arbitrary tyranny of the beige suburb. The day before the HOA meeting, I put the final touches on the Studio of Spite. I used a label maker to print small, official-looking labels for everything: kick drum, volume regulatory device; snare drum, anti-grievance instrument; and hi-hat, the sound of freedom. I hung a massive color-printed banner over the acoustic tiles that read, "The Cease and Desist: Slayers Advanced Rhythmic Enrichment and Compliance Theory, a non-profit educational initiative." I even bought a small whiteboard and wrote out a lesson plan featuring notes on 4/4 time and the difference between a ride and a crash cymbal. This was more than just a place to play drums. This was a statement. This was plausible deniability weaponized into a legitimate education space, all thanks to Brenda and her relentless commitment to administrative warfare. I sent a quick, triumphant text to Maria. The bunker is ready. The paperwork is ready. The sheer, magnificent pettiness is ready. Maria replied instantly. The permits are your shield. The snark is your sword. Go kill him, Leo. The HOA meeting was held in the poorly lit, multi-purpose room above the community pool. It smelled like chlorine and poorly brewed instant coffee. About 20 people were present, mostly older residents who treated the HOA board like the Supreme Court. Brenda was there, seated in the front row, wearing a sensible navy suit and holding her spiral-bound 30-page manifesto like the holy grail of complaints. The HOA president, a perpetually exhausted man named Gary, not the contractor, thank God, called the meeting to order. Brenda went first. She spent 20 minutes presenting her case. She used a laser pointer and showed the assembly her grainy photographs. Photo 1, the dumpster. Photo 2, a truck delivering insulation. Photo 3, Leo waving smugly at Brenda's window. She demanded action. This is not about noise, board members, she declared, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. This is about standards. Mr. Maxwell has unilaterally and selfishly converted an integral part of his residential property into a quasi-commercial structure that disrupts the aesthetic and acoustic harmony of this community. I ask that you order him to return the garage to its original, intended state. The floor was then mine. I walked up, holding only a single piece of paper. The city permit. Leo's snarky conversational speech, winning over the weary audience. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leo Maxwell. I'm here tonight to discuss my garage, or, as Brenda calls it, the quasi-commercial structure of unknown intent. I appreciate Brenda's tireless dedication to tracking the construction process. It truly takes a certain level of commitment to document the daily routine of a contractor, and I think we all admire her vigilance. A few people chuckled nervously. Brenda asserts that I am violating residential zoning by building a commercial studio. Now, if I were running a commercial studio, I would have to charge for services, which would be tacky. No, board. What I have built is a fully permitted, structurally sound, and acoustically isolated space for educational enrichment and youth development. I held up the banner I had made and pointed to the words, Non-Profit Educational Initiative. As you can see by this city permit, filed and approved by Maria Hernandez, a licensed contractor, the structure is 100% compliant with all building codes. And as for the noise, the specific complaint that started this whole venture was about 82 decibels of a lemonade stand. I pulled out my decibel reading from the test run. Inside my new structure, with a full professional drummer operating at peak volume, the noise level at the property line, Brenda's property line, is 48 decibels. That's less noise than an average dishwasher. I looked directly at Brenda. In fact, Brenda, I want to thank you. Your dedication to compliance forced me to build a space so soundproof that my children can now pursue their musical talents without disturbing anyone. You created the solution to your own problem. I finished by putting the city permit down on the table. I welcome the board to visit my property and witness the lack of noise pollution firsthand. If the board finds that my children pursuing a hobby is grounds for structural demolition, then I guess we'll all have to rethink what community integrity means. The HOA president, Gary, looked utterly defeated. He looked at Brenda's thick binder, then at my single city permit, and finally at the exhausted faces of the other neighbors. Mr. Maxwell, he sighed, rubbing his temples, as the structure is fully permitted by the city, and you have demonstrated that the noise level at the property line is compliant with city ordinances regarding peace and quiet, the HOA board finds no violation." He banged a cheap plastic gavel. "Motion to issue a stop work order fails. Case closed." Brenda shot to her feet, her face the color of the forbidden antique copper mailbox paint. "This is outrageous. This is a deliberate, targeted act of aggression. You are rewarding him for spite." "Brenda," Gary said, sounding genuinely weary, "I'm rewarding him for compliance. He built a silent room." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting the silence of my victory speak for itself. It was the purest form of winning. I hadn't resorted to yelling or name-calling or an emotional plea. I had simply followed the rules, only to a magnificent, ridiculous extreme. Watching Brenda realize she had engineered her own defeat. Watching her beautiful, terrible case fall apart because she didn't realize the difference between temporary construction noise and permanent soundproofing was the most satisfying moment of my entire adult life. I walked out, leaving Brenda arguing with the board HOA secretary about whether a failed motion required a quorum or a simple majority. I had won the war. The day after the HOA meeting felt different. The air was cleaner. The sun was brighter. It was the calm after the storm, except the storm had been replaced by a beautiful, muffled thump, thump, thump coming from the sound bunker. Brenda was still ignoring me, which I considered a major diplomatic win. She wouldn't even look at my house when she walked Princess Fluffy Butt. She looked straight ahead, maintaining a rigid posture, like a highly decorated officer ignoring a blatant act of treason. The drums were no longer a weapon of war. They were a monument. They were the physical embodiment of the phrase, "Don't complain about my minor noise, or I will legally construct a fully permitted structure designed to house a major noise source just to prove a point." It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was mine. I reflected on the pure absurdity of it all. I had spent thousands of dollars to ensure my kids could make a noise that my neighbor couldn't hear, only because my neighbor couldn't tolerate the sound of them selling lemonade. It was a vicious cycle of pettiness, and I was the reigning champion. Saturday morning, I was hosing down the driveway, a truly Sisyphean task, when a familiar car pulled up. Not the patrol car, a beaten-up Toyota sedan. Officer Miller stepped out, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. "Leo," he said, walking over. "Just dropping something off." He handed me a small, wrapped package. It was a pair of drumsticks. Good quality ones, too. "I saw the notice for the band name," he said, a genuine grin finally breaking through his weary exterior. "The Cease and Desist Slayers. That's inspired." "It's just educational enrichment, officer," I reminded him. "Right. Well, I was at the station when the building inspector called in. Apparently, he spent half an hour in your garage and called it the most over-engineered residential space he'd ever seen. He signed off on everything, said he couldn't even hear the crash cymbal when he stood on the property line." "Mission accomplished, then." He leaned against the Toyota. "Look, Leo, I was rooting for you. Some calls, you just know who the real problem is. So I figured I'd drop these off. Do you ever play?" "Me? Oh God, no. I have the rhythm of a startled moose." "Come on, just try a beat. Show me what you got." I couldn't refuse the man who had given me the winning legal strategy. I walked to the soundproof door, opened it, and grabbed a random stick. "A quick one," I warned, stepping inside the bunker. I hit the snare drum once, hard. It produced a single, loud crack that immediately died within the foam-lined walls. I hit the kick drum, and then the snare, and then the hi-hat. A simple, terrible 4-beat rhythm that sounded like a cat falling down a flight of stairs. Crack, thump, tisk, tick. I walked back out, laughing. See? Startled moose. Miller laughed, a rich, full sound. Yeah, stick to writing, Leo. But seriously, that soundproofing is incredible. Tell Maria she did a good job, and tell the boys good luck. He nodded and drove off. It was a moment of true suburban camaraderie, forged in the fires of bureaucratic warfare. The biggest twist in the entire saga was the new status quo. The soundproofed garage, the ultimate expression of my personal vendetta, actually started serving a surprisingly positive community purpose. Word gets around in the suburbs. Parents who have kids with actual musical talent, or just incredibly loud, terrible hobbies, started asking me about the music room. Leo, could my son Timmy practice his trumpet there? We just moved him to the basement, but I'm worried about the foundation. Leo, my daughter's garage band, the Quiet Rioters, needs a place to practice where they don't wake up the baby. Suddenly, the garage became the neighborhood's go-to spot for anything loud, messy, or socially disruptive. I had inadvertently created a free, community-funded anti-noise sanctuary. Humorous twist. Brenda, unable to complain about the noise from my house, had to contend with the increased foot traffic and carpooling of other suburban families dropping off their noisy, aspiring musicians. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. She had fought the symptoms, my kid's minor noise, but failed to fight the disease. Suburban life generates noise. By forcing me to soundproof, she had simply shifted the source of her frustration to the influx of other vehicles and other people, which, hilariously, was covered by her initial, unpermitted foot traffic complaint. She was now complaining to the HOA about the neighbors visiting Leo. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a Saturday afternoon, sipping coffee. The boys were in the bunker, practicing their latest song, a terrible but enthusiastic cover of an old rock track. I heard only the faintest bass thrumming beneath the earth. I saw Brenda across the street. She wasn't walking her dog. She was standing at the edge of her lawn, clutching a small, laminated sign that she was attempting to hammer into the grass. The sign, which I had to squint to read, was clearly a professionally printed job. It read, "Private residence, no soliciting, no loitering, no musical instruction drop-offs." She was still fighting, still documenting, still trying to impose order on a fundamentally chaotic universe. But now, she wasn't battling me. She was battling the collective desire of a dozen different suburban families to avoid the noise of their own children. She had lost her focus. I shook my head and laughed. I had won. Not by being louder, but by being quieter in a way she couldn't argue with. I had found the ultimate suburban weapon: over-engineered, bureaucratic compliance. The battle for sanity in the suburbs is never truly over, only temporarily soundproofed. I took a sip of coffee and looked at the imposing, silent, gray structure of the garage. It was a beautiful monument to spite. I saw Brenda, still struggling with the hammer, probably about to write a strongly worded letter to the manufacturer of the steak. I smiled. Brenda still writes her strongly worded letters, but now they just feel like background noise. And honestly, I think I prefer the drums.